Hey, everybody. Welcome into another week of the Banners Fly Forever football show. This is Dan and Tim, your hosts once again. We are here with our divisional round recap. We have four great games to talk about. We're also going to dive a little bit into head coaching and coordinator hires. There's been a couple moves around the league that are going to have some major impacts on how these franchises are being built. And then even a little bit of talk about fantasy football and how these values of these players in dynasty leagues can be changing. First of all, Tim, how was the weekend of football? What were your big league takeaways from
I
the
mean,
weekend?
just like this is what we were waiting for, right? Like this was when you're watching all year and you get like maybe one game a week that you're kind of pumped about. Like a couple of them through the year, like the Eagles Chiefs Monday Night Football, like a game that happened, or like when Bills Cowboys happened. Like there's like one game a week maybe that you're getting excited about. This was just four awesome games that I mean probably had the best football being played like this year in several of them, which is where we're like, this is why we watch football. I mean, this is when we get to this time of year that you're like, this is the best sport. Like it's so much fun to watch. The drama of the moments. I mean, I have no skin in the game on any of these games, and I could feel my heart pounding like several times. Like I was like, oh man, like I need to like sit back here for a second because like I'm getting really amped for. I have no idea if you were a 49ers or Packers fan or a Bills or Chiefs fan, how you weren't just like absolutely having a heart attack for almost the entirety of like, the fourth quarter for your games. Just awesome football. I can't go past saying though, watching it, that if you don't have the quarterback, it's not happening. Because you watch these games and it's like, I mean, Josh Allen played lights out, was unbelievable, and didn't even get a win again against the Chiefs. And you watch these games, and when it gets to this time of year, and this is probably being spoken by a Bears fan who, we're trying to figure out the quarterback ourselves, but you get to this time of year and you're not winning if you don't have a leader as a quarterback. And it's going to be really, really exciting to see what that brings to both of these championship matchups this weekend.
Yeah, I was on the edge of my seat all weekend. For a recap, let's just go through the weekend
Sure.
sequentially. First we traveled to Baltimore, M&T Bank Stadium, where we had the Ravens defeated the Houston Texans 34-10. Although I don't know about you, Tim, but I feel like this final score isn't exactly representative of how close this game was. Let's remember they were going to the half and it was 10-10, kind of like anybody's ball game.
The
And it
Texans
wasn't,
could have been winning. I mean, they missed a field goal at the end of the
yeah,
half.
yeah. And it wasn't until the Ravens put up, the final dagger in the fourth quarter with 17 unanswered
Yeah.
points that this game really became like sort of the blowout that we see. But
Right.
I mean, this Houston Texans team, they can't come away from the season with any disappointments. Like, yes, you went into Baltimore and you got, beat by more than 3 scores, but it was a fight, which is a
Yeah.
lot more than we could say about when the Lions played the Ravens earlier this
Yeah.
year, or even when the 49ers played the Ravens earlier
Absolutely.
this year. I feel like those games were bigger blowouts than
Yep.
this Texans game was. And now Houston goes into the offseason. You've got D'Amico Ryans and CJ Stroud entering their second year. During the head coaching segment, we'll talk about a little bit about Bobby Slowick and where he is potentially landing. I am starting to get the feeling that he actually might be back in Houston next season.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of big names out in head coaching vacancy
Agreed.
land that are going to get jobs over him.
Yep.
And I think a lot of franchise owners are going to say, that was a great year. Let's see it again. Let's see how the league reacts to that
Right.
offense with a full off season to break it down and really come up with ways to stop it. I mean, yes, Baltimore stopped it on Saturday,
Yeah.
but at what point did they stop it just because Baltimore has, the dudes? Because
Yeah.
Ozzie Newsome has put a great roster together and
Yeah.
Baltimore just has, a stacked 11-man defensive starting roster.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this when we were doing all our draft coverage last year, is just when I have been watching the draft over the last 5, 6 years, I'm always amazed at how good Baltimore drafts. They always do a fantastic job of finding quality picks throughout the draft, and it is come to show in this team. Like that defense is stout, and there isn't really a hole anywhere. There are guys who are, Pro Bowl caliber all over the place. I don't think any of them is necessarily like the number one player at their position. Maybe Roquan Smith, maybe, is one of the best linebackers, but like
Kyle
they're
Hamilton's
Kyle
quickly entering
Hamilton.
that conversation.
Exactly. But like they're all, we're still kind of like, yeah, he is, but also there's these guys. Like there's no, Nick Bosa or TJ Watt or, they're just such a good unit. You know what I mean? And there's not a hole anywhere. And that becomes something that's almost impossible to get through. And the only way the Texans were winning that game was if CJ Stroud was going to hit every single pass, and all of them they had to be perfect. There was
Yeah.
no easy passes in that game. And that eventually caught up with them. I just don't know if this is going to be a team that can consistently do this every single year, because defense with injuries and with turnover and free agents, they have a few free agents coming up this year, but like right now, this current unit is scary good. I don't know if you saw that stat that people have been tweeting around about how Roquan Smith and Ray Lewis's careers are oddly similar for the first.
I actually haven't seen that. So
Yeah, for the
please do
first
share.
for the first 6 NFL seasons for both players, Roquan's only played in 2 more games. Ray Lewis only has 27 more tackles, 878 to 851. Roquan Smith has a half extra sack, and first team All Pros, Ray Lewis had 3 and Roquan Smith had 2. So like they're just kind of like lining up really nicely of just, this is what the Ravens do, right? Like they have really good linebackers, whether it's Ray Lewis or Terrell Suggs or Roquan Smith now, and they run to the ball. Like there was just never a play that was coming easy for the Texans, and that wears you down so bad. So like we were saying, it was a game at half, but eventually it kind of broke, and eventually the Ravens just completely took over the game, and that's kind of what a physical defense like that will do. And the Texans, I mean, there's a lot to look forward to. And like you said, I think Bobby Slowick will be back. They had some injuries on the offense. They're going to have a lot of money to bring in some extra people. But I don't think you could ever look at this year as any type of failure for Houston, because we were projecting them to be a lot lower.
I was going to say, we literally live during the draft last year was saying like, oh man, they traded their first round pick. Like, good job, Arizona. You're going to have, 2 top 5 picks going into the 2024 NFL draft.
Right.
But obviously, D'Amico's done a great job. CJ is, like we said, he's Georgia CJ almost week in, week out at this point. And, we said it, I think, last week, but $75 million to play with.
Yep.
And not a lot of major contracts that have to go down on the books this year. So
Yeah.
Houston has it's a very positive outlook for the Texans,
Right.
Going forward. We'll get into the Bills, obviously, when we talk about that later, and how it's kind of like the exact opposite outlook when you're looking
Sure.
at the offseason. But the Baltimore Ravens, like, I hate who's going to stop this team. I know the answer is Patrick Mahomes, because he's going to do Patrick Mahomes things like we saw this past weekend. But
right.
like, honestly, like, I don't know if anybody watching has realized, but I actually have an Ozzie Newsome jersey right hanging on my wall. And I was joking about, he's one of the all-time great Browns tight ends in history, but
yep.
I could also have it up there because he's one of the all-time great front office personnel,
absolutely.
Of the past 20 years. What he does in Baltimore year in, year out is just amazing. And it's like, you look at a player like Tyler Linderbaum, taking a center at the back end of the first round. It's a position that's usually devalued in the draft. Interior offensive line don't go very high outside of like a player like, Quentin Nelson. So, he's sitting there saying, like, at what point do I just take the best player available, which is a center? And yes, the value might not be there, but, he's definitely working out because Tyler's playing like, top 10, top 12 center in the league right now. So it's a real credit to Ozzie. It's a real credit to that coaching staff. And you could see because, McDonald's on defense and Todd Monken on offense, they are 2 names that are in this current head coaching cycle.
Yep.
I know Monken, it's his first year out of college. He's at Georgia.
Yep.
He's offensive coordinator this year. His name's already on the board for maybe a head coaching position.
Sure.
And McDonald, I want to say he's been with Baltimore not that much longer. Has it been, what, 2 or 3 years
I think
now?
it's only been 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. So, it's just it's just another. I mean, I hate saying this as a Browns fan, but it's just another sign of a great organization that they
Right.
can bring players and coaching personnel, and have these guys be so successful that they are wanted at the next level.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, I hate to say it, but Browns and Bears are kind of similar in the last like 10 years. Like we've had good coaches along the way, but how many times has a coordinator on either of our franchises been in the names of like head coaching hires?
Yeah. I mean, I think
Not very often,
in
right?
the last like 20 something years, the only guys I could think of are Adam Gase had a cup of coffee as a head coach after being with the Bears, and Ron Rivera was once the Bears defensive coordinator. So that's
Yeah.
really like the whole run of them.
Yeah, so I
Um,
feel like, honestly, at the sign of a really well-run franchise is when you get your coaching staff's names out there for head coaching hires, and,
right.
you see teams like San Francisco all the time, you see teams like Baltimore all the time, are always constantly moving on coordinators, but it's a double-edged sword. You look at
Yep.
Philadelphia with the Eagles and what they're going through
Yeah.
right now, for the second offseason in a row, they're hiring offensive and defensive coordinators this year for the complete opposite reason, because of
Yeah.
failure.
But the difference here is, Nick Sirianni had a lot of success really early on, and now they're trying to figure out is this a guy that got lucky having a couple of really good coordinators and is struggling now compared to John Harbaugh, who's been with the Ravens for 16 years and is a very good coach and does what a head coach needs to do and lets his coordinators do what they need to do. The other thing with who's going to stop the Ravens is, while other teams are, kind of having injury bugs and trying to get through, just getting to the end of the season, Marlon Humphrey and Mark Andrews might both return this weekend. So like the Ravens are actually getting healthier.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll get into the matchup with the Chiefs in a little bit, but it's going to be hard for them to be stopped.
And now let's move on to our second of the Saturday slates. We had the Green Bay Packers travel to the San Francisco 49ers. Packers, one of the hottest teams entering the playoffs,
Yeah.
and then they rode that hot streak to take down Dallas last week.
Mm-hmm.
They almost rode that hot streak all the way to knocking off San Francisco as well. Obviously the rain conditions were a big factor in this. There was points where Brock Purdy has glove on, glove off.
Yep.
There's points where like he drops back and like has the ball and is still like trying to wipe his hand off.
Yeah.
So how much is that preparation before the game? How much is that maybe mental, getting inside your own head, telling yourself that it's the rain when it's like you're just actually not on your peak game? We saw Deebo Samuel leave the game with a shoulder injury,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, Brock put together that final drive that San Francisco needed to overcome and to win the game. And as I mean, I don't want to like start with comparisons, but like think about how many great quarterbacks, in our lifetime have just sucked for 3 quarters.
Yeah.
And you put it on the fourth quarter and you just
Yep.
put 10 on the board
Yeah.
and you get your defense to keep you in it. And that's all you need to move on. And you know what? You come back next week and the really great ones, they shake off that, it's any given Sunday mentality and you don't let last week bother you and you shake it off and you
Right.
perform the following week. Now, does Brock have that? We'll see. We'll see what,
Yeah.
because he's had so much success in his young career
Yeah.
that we haven't really seen him go through this level of adversity. There was the 3-game slide during the regular season, but looking back on it, everybody can kind of attribute that to how, like, Trent Williams was out, Deebo Samuel was out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But is this the first time where he's actually just not produced and then had to come back the following week and forget that happened and, and put a good game out there? So credit to the Packers. I know you hate hearing that because being a Bears fan at all,
It's a
but
reality, man.
just like the Texans, it's another team that going into the beginning of the season, what were we saying about the NFC North and Green Bay? We were saying like Green Bay might be at the bottom of this division.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very real chance they finish in fourth place.
Right.
And Jordan Love, he got a prove it deal on the line with Green Bay, and he kind of went out there and he proved it this year.
Absolutely. I mean, a couple things. First, the Brock Purdy, I mean, the fourth quarter was absolutely like, it was nice to see him wake up and to start playing well. The one thing I would say throughout the game was, for how, kind of off he looked in the first 3 quarters, he did make some big throws several times in those first 3 quarters. Like there would be throws that were way off, and I was like, dude, San Francisco is not going to be able to win this game if he's playing like this. And then he would hit a perfect throw, and you're like, okay, well, he is still there. So like keeping with it, and and not just giving like into the fact that you're playing poorly. He was fighting, and he ended up finding it, and that was a big thing. The Packers were playing great. I couldn't believe how easily they were working through the 49ers defense. And that's a defense that, we've been talking about all year is kind of a stout, really solid defense. I didn't know if the Packers were ever going to punt in this game. I mean, like it was kind of unbelievable how easily they were moving up and down the field. And when you add on top of it that Ambry Thomas just could not stop interfering, like getting long drives extended. There was the one that was like a 3rd and 11, and it was like a 40-yard pass interference because he just tackled the dude instead of looking up at the ball. It's like
Yeah.
the defense looked completely out of it, and I know that they look completely out of it because their coach was acting that way. The end of the first half, the 49ers had 3 timeouts with 1:30 on the clock, and they were at midfield, and they ended up having to settle for like a 40-something yard field goal because they were trying to drain clock down to make sure they weren't leaving any time on the clock for Jordan Love at the end of the half to come down and try to kick a field goal themselves. Like,
Can you imagine saying that sentence back in August?
no, Kyle Shanahan was worried about Jordan Love in the playoffs, driving down with less than a minute to go and getting points because they were just walking through that defense. I mean, that's why the 49ers had to kick a long field goal and Moody missed. And, we didn't have, I think the game was tied at half. And it was just like, I couldn't believe as I was watching, I was going like, this is Kyle Shanahan in the 49ers office. And they are just like kind of letting the air out of the ball here at the end of the half. Pretty wild. I mean, the defense came up at the end, if you want to call it that. Jordan Love kind of threw a duck across his body that is an ill-advised pass. But the defense did do what they had to do at the end to get them the win. It's just, I think where San Francisco was peaking was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. I mean, like a little bit before that Ravens game. And I think in their own heads, they have some questions about how good they actually are right now because they're not playing with any sort of swagger or confidence right now. So maybe getting the win against the Packers and getting through to the next round gets them back on track. But it was a lot scarier of a game than I anticipated it being.
Well, let's remember also Darnell Savage had 2 dropped
Yep,
interceptions
absolutely.
that honestly he catches one of those. And, it was only a 3-point game at the end of the day, 24-21. He
Yep.
catches one of those, and we're talking about, a 7 seed playing in the NFC Championship game.
Yep.
So
and Detroit having a home NFC Championship game.
Yeah, but Green Bay, Detroit at home NFC Championship game.
Yeah,
just,
I mean, imagine
just like we all envisioned back in August.
Exactly.
But so now San Francisco has to, regroup, refocus, and then we also have the question of is what is going on with Deebo Samuel and his shoulder. I'm fully confident he's going to play next week.
Yeah.
Like 100% confident he's going to play.
Yep.
What I'm not confident about is like how effective he'll be. Is he out there as a decoy? Is he just a body?
Right.
Is he just going to grit and bear it and not operate at 100%? And how much is that going to affect this offense?
I was surprised he wasn't decoying in this game. Like when they were showing some shots of the sideline, like there was one where he was kind of like yelling and trying to pump the team up, and he was like physically getting into it. And I was like, if he can at least look like he can play, I'm surprised they're not just trying to have him like, faking ends around and stuff, just to scare the defense.
What I was surprised was, I think, watching the game live, a tweet came in that he was questionable return.
Right.
And the commentators made it sound like, oh yeah, he's going to be back. And like literally 5 minutes later, there's a shot of him on the sidelines in like street clothes.
Right.
And Deebo Samuel is like definitely out the rest of the game. And like you said, I was surprised that happened because now listen, how much of that movement is the adrenaline of the game?
Yep.
How much is that they maybe shot him up a little something to see how he works?
Of course.
So, there's always that behind the curtain stuff that we don't have any privy to.
And I never want to be like, oh, toughen up and get out there like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I'm a fat guy sitting on a couch. I have no way to actually be like, Debo's such a baby. Like, I mean, no, but I mean, it was just interesting watching it going like their season is on the line. They are losing in this game right now. I'm just kind of surprised that like even Debo wasn't just like, look, I'm keeping the pads on, use me as a decoy, do whatever, or at least have me in my pads on the sideline and give them the threat I could come back in or something.
I will say it's very funny looking forward at it. You know, next week the matchup, say Debo's out, the running backs don't matter. Crowd are going to take some L's next week because
Hmm.
it's going to be Christian McCaffrey versus Jameer Gibbs.
Absolutely.
In the NFC Championship game, pretty much. And I personally can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good one. But speaking of the Detroit Lions,
Yeah.
let's get into the first of the two games on Sunday. We have the Detroit Lions at home taking down Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Bucks, 31-23. This was a very exciting game.
It was.
This was very back and forth. It was very interesting. And I will say it right now, I'm not a Baker hater, but I'm a Cleveland Browns fan. And when he got that last drive set up, I'm like, you Tampa fans, you're new to this.
You're
You
about to feel the pain.
you don't know the way this script plays out. I should have looked up the stat before the show, but Baker's time in Cleveland, in fourth quarter, under 2 minute, last comeback type of drives, his track record was not very good. Now listen,
Yeah.
it's not like he was an offer. I still remember that Cincinnati game, back in
Sure.
2021,
Sure.
Joe Burrow's rookie year. That was amazing. But there's also so many times where the win was right there in the grasp and he just, he throws the ball away. And unfortunately, that's what happens in this one. And,
Right.
Detroit will be moving on to the NFC Championship game. And I mean, their story this year has just been amazing.
Yeah.
It's been an amazing miracle run thinking about what Dan Campbell started with when he first took over the job. Like, God, I remember when he first took over the job, people were like, oh, this is like a Lovey Smith in Houston type of situation. He's just the fall man. He's the tank commander. He's there as like the rah rah, get
Yep.
the fans in the stands, try to sell some tickets before we bottom out.
Right.
And then once the rebuild is on, we'll bring in another head coach to, guide this roster.
Right.
And it's just nice to see that Dan Campbell's been there since the start. And we all laughed at the beginning with the biting kneecaps and him crying every
Sure.
2 seconds,
Sure.
being a player's player and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, he's been a great coach.
Yep.
And a lot of people say he's like, a football meathead. But if you look at like his analytics and is going for it and all this stuff, like he's at the leading edge of the analytics community when it comes to coaches when you look at everyone across the league. So
Yeah.
it's an amazing. I know you don't want to hear this, obviously, but it's an
It's
amazing.
reality. I mean,
It's an amazing story to see what him and Brad Holmes have taken this roster
Yeah.
to over the course of the number of years. Because let's think back, they traded Matthew Stafford away and got more picks because they were taking on Jared Goff.
Yeah.
And now the Rams are sitting at home on the couch
Yeah.
watching this weekend when the Lions are playing
Sure.
in the NFC
I mean, they have
Championship game.
rings on, but yes.
Yes, it was worth it in their point of view, but it's just amazing what the story. And also at the same time, credit to Baker and the Tampa Bay Bucks.
Yeah.
Baker came into the season making, I think, less than $4 million this year, which is less than some backups across the league were making.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's pretty obvious that he will be back in Tampa for
Yeah.
2024.
I mean, I don't think he's going to try to go somewhere else. It was a good situation for him in Tampa. Things worked out really nicely there. They went on a run that I don't think anybody expected them to. So I would expect that they're going to bring him back and he'll want to be back. This offseason, and I know he never will, like maybe work on a little finesse in throwing because like not everything has to be a fastball. Like, I mean, so many times it just he's firing it in there. And I had a buddy who was like texting me, he's like, man, Mike Evans has to make that catch. And I'm like, yeah, it'd be great if Mike Evans made that catch, but also he doesn't need to whip it in so hot that it's just like impossible to catch. So Baker is, exactly who he is, and you're getting exactly who he is. And sometimes that's awesome, and sometimes that's a little scary. It was a unexpected run that they kind of went on near the end of the year to one, win the division, and two, get as far as they went. And credit to them, they were down 2 touchdowns, kind of late in that game, drove right down the field, got a touchdown, and got the ball back with a chance to tie the game. So, I mean, they kept fighting and they stayed in there. And I mean, I wasn't expecting it at all from the Bucks, and they were close in that game. So that was, all credit to them. On the Detroit side, yes, Dan Campbell he's hitting all the right buttons right now. He's got his team playing with confidence, with swagger. They look awesome out there. And the one thing I'll say about this run is, I hope the Lions can get as far as, their fans are dreaming. I hope that they can get to the Super Bowl, that they can possibly win a Super Bowl, because the reality is they're going to lose Ben Johnson this offseason. Like, they are going to have their offensive coordinator move on. And that's not to say this offense is doomed at that point. But I mean, look at the differences of teams when, you have a really, really positive year. You're having, you go further than you may have ever thought you were going to go. And then you lose your offensive coordinator and trying to kind of repick up the pieces from there. Like, the closest I think the Bills were ever at to making the Super Bowl was when they had Brian Daboll as their offensive coordinator. And then he left and he went to the New York Giants, and they kind of been fighting to figure out what that was. It was Ken Dorsey at first, and then they had to fire him and bring in Joe Brady mid-year this year. So, that happened. We had Nick Sirianni and the Eagles going all the way to the Super Bowl this year. And then when Steichen leaves, all of a sudden that offense doesn't look the same anymore. So it's just, I said this to my dad when we were walking out of the game, the double doink game of the Bears losing to the Eagles. And I just said, the thing that kills me right now is I don't know when we'll be back there. And that was the feeling that I had. And we have not been back anywhere near there since that point. And so I hope for Lions fans that, they can find a way to win this NFC Championship game, get to the first Super Bowl in franchise history, because you don't know, what tomorrow's going to bring, what injuries are going to happen. So it's a great story. It's really fun to see it continue. Even as a Bears fan, like, I know I'll be cheering probably for the Lions this weekend just because it's such a fun story. I don't know if anybody outside of the Bay Area is going to be cheering for the 49ers.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that about, coordinators leaving and teams taking a step back the following season. And it's just another argument why coaches like McVay and Shanahan that call their own
Mm-hmm.
offenses for their own teams are so super valuable,
Right.
because no matter what coordinator leaves, that offense and that play calling will always be in place,
Mm-hmm.
and you always have that continuation for your quarterback year in, year out. And
We just
that's
talked
why,
about the Packers and Matt LaFleur, man. I mean,
yeah,
like, we just talked about, we didn't think Jordan Love and the Packers are going to be relevant, and a guy that was consistent there, that had a great offense there, got them right back to almost the NFC Championship game this year.
it's amazing how good you can look when you've been working with the same playbook for
Exactly. Yep.
5 years.
Exactly.
And so obviously Ben Johnson and we talked about Bobby Slowick are the hot names in the head coaching circuit right now, besides your veterans like Harbaugh and Belichick. But the reason is because, like, if Ben Johnson goes to a team, let's say the Carolina Panthers,
Mm-hmm.
they're confident that as long as Ben Johnson's there, you have the same offensive system and you have the same playbook, which is continuity
Yeah.
for whatever quarterback you have under center, which is something huge. I saw a tweet about Jalen Hurts today where, like, if you go and look over the past, I think it was 8 years of his career when you include college in there,
Yeah.
and he's had like 10 different coordinators,
Yeah.
between Alabama, Oklahoma, and then
Right.
Philadelphia, going through people. And we talk about a player like Baker Mayfield, and a lot of Browns fans saying,
Yeah.
he got the short end of the stick because, in his time in Cleveland, he had like 5 coordinators,
Right. Right.
and you're trying to learn 5 different play calling schemes,
Right.
vocabulary for 5 different, offensive systems. And it
Right.
just adds to an already like huge pile of things
Mm-hmm.
that quarterbacks have to go through on a weekly, monthly, or yearly basis to, really master their craft. And you said, Baker working on his touch. And the one thing in Cleveland always bugged me was, in the offseason, he never worked with a quarterback coach.
Sure.
And we always said, like, why? But after that rant I just gave, I just clicked. Like, the reason he wasn't working with a quarterback coach was because
He didn't have one.
he was nose in the books,
Yeah.
trying to learn the next offensive scheme, trying to learn the way the
Yeah.
next coordinator works. And so Ben Johnson has obviously been a name for a number of years. I want to say the last 2 years
Yeah,
has been a hot name. And I think Bobby Slowick's going to be back just because I think there's too many veteran coaches in this cycle. But those guys are gold.
yeah,
If you can get a head coach in who is an offensive guy, they are just as good as gold. Because you look at the job that Shanahan's been doing. Like, how many coaches has he put out? From that San Francisco
absolutely.
franchise, and not even just the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball as well.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
there's obviously no salary cap when it comes to head coaches.
Exactly.
And
It's the
if
one that
I
you can
was
splurge on. Yeah.
if I was an eccentric billionaire owner of a team, my my coaches would be
Only one of those
very.
were out there.
If only I'd have stumbled upon that. But
Yeah. I mean, speaking of offensive minded head coaches with success, I mean, Andy Reid. I'm not going to say that Patrick Mahomes wouldn't be Patrick Mahomes, or at least an awesome quarterback without him. But there's a guy that is consistent, that has the same playbook year in and year out, and even when you don't have a weapon at all at wide receiver, you can still find your way to your sixth straight AFC Championship game. Chiefs and Bills. I don't know, man. They're the boogeyman, right? I mean, like you can beat us all the times you want to in the regular season, but when it comes to the playoffs, Patrick Mahomes just has the
your
Bills
number,
number, and
yeah,
it played out exactly how the other ones have played out. I mean, it was a back and forth game. Who's going to have the ball last? Who's going to be able to kick the last kick? And unfortunately for the Bills, they were the last kick, and it was sadly wide right. A sad historical thing for the Bills, but I watched this game, and this one is the one specifically, was the last one that we saw, was the one where I'm like, football's the best. Like, this was just back and forth, blow for blow, and two guys at quarterback playing unbelievable football. I mean, there were plays that were happening in this game that I was just like, this is why you have to have a quarterback. Josh Allen's touchdown on 3rd and goal that was like from the 14, right to basically the pylon for Shakir, is just, it's an unreal throw. And there's only so many guys that can do that. And basically the two guys that would come to mind were the two playing in this game. If you don't have a quarterback like this, you just can't go anywhere. And meanwhile, Patrick Mahomes was just ripping through this defense. Now, the defense had a ton of injuries, which needs to be noted. Their best linebacker, AJ Klein, was a guy the Bears cut last year. So, I mean, the Bears cut this guy. But I think going into the fourth quarter, the Chiefs were averaging 9.2 yards per play, and they were losing going into the fourth quarter. Like, that's how wild this game was. But again, the Chiefs just find a way to win, and betting against them is just crazy this time of year because they find a way to win. When we were talking earlier about who's going to stop Baltimore, if anybody's going to do it, it's just this team. They are battle tested. They have players that have done it over and over again, and winners on this team. I don't know, man. It's so crazy to have gone from a Patriots organization that went to like 7 straight AFC Championship games, and then to have that bridge of the last one being Chiefs Patriots, and now the Chiefs have gone on 6 straight. So it's been like 13 straight AFC Championship games that have either the Chiefs or the Patriots in it. It's just wild to see that transition.
yes. Sunday night was an instant classic,
Yeah,
and you know what the thing was. We go back, we look on games like, oh, that was a classic. That was a classic. You knew even before the game started, you're
yeah,
like, this is an all timer.
yeah,
And then just like from the first kickoff, you're like, this, like you said, this is the epitome of football.
yeah,
You're like, I hate to say like, we peaked too early, but like,
yeah.
I'm like, how can the Super Bowl even,
Right.
even beat this level of game? And like you said, Josh and Patrick, like they lay it out on the line. I actually said last week that if Josh Allen has a clean sheet, I think the Bills win. He did have a clean sheet this week. He
Yeah.
had one fumble, but he recovered himself,
Yeah.
and that still wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And just like the early '90s Bills, like you said, wide right.
Yeah.
Years of success just to come up so short. And you know, this early 2020s Bills,
Yeah.
it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They just keep getting pushed up. And then this was even the year. This was the
Yeah.
year Buffalo got the game in their backyard,
Yeah.
their crazy fans, their weather. It was
Yeah.
their time to shine.
And Kansas City looked more vulnerable than ever. Like this was supposed to be it,
Yeah,
right?
this was supposed to be it. Yeah. And now, we're not fully into, off-season talk, but there's already talks like, was this it for Buffalo?
Right.
Like, because Josh Allen's cap hit next year, it jumps up to 49 million.
Yep.
I mean, the cap is a myth.
Exactly.
How long ago was it Patrick Mahomes signed that extension for, biggest quarterback contract
Right.
ever?
And now it doesn't
And
look that crazy at all.
it doesn't look that crazy.
Yeah.
If you draft well, if you sign the right free agents for the right amounts, you
Right.
can always make it back to where you need to be. So
And if you have an elite quarterback, I mean,
that's
whether he's getting paid or not, Josh Allen's still on this team.
that's
So,
honestly the cheat code.
yep.
Because and like Josh, he's so big back there and he's so physical that he is also your fullback. He is
Right.
also your running back.
Yeah.
And like you think so the NFL draft, we do a lot of NFL draft coverage here.
Right.
And what is the biggest talk every year of the NFL draft? Who is the quarterback? Who
Right.
is the next guy?
Right.
That is the ultimate goal for any franchise that doesn't have that guy
Yep.
is getting that guy.
It's the most
That's
important position in any
that's why you
sport.
see, my organization, the Cleveland Browns,
Yeah.
sign their souls to the devil
Right.
just to get a guy they thought would be the guy.
Right.
It's looking like he's not. So guess what? We're gonna go back out and we're gonna go try to find the
Right
next
down
guy.
to that well again. Yep.
In Chicago,
Yep.
you thought you had a guy in Justin Fields,
Right.
and now the whole conversation is like, oh, do we move on from Fields and and trade him and go with Caleb? Do we keep Caleb? I mean, do we
Right.
keep Fields and trade the pick or draft Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Right.
I hate to say it. If you're this late in his career and you're asking the question,
Yep.
he's not the guy.
Exactly.
He's not the guy.
And more than likely, it's going to be our third quarterback taken in the top 12 picks since 2017. I mean, that's just what you have to keep doing, and
you have to keep firing.
And you realize, like, because I mean, like this pick the Bears have, it's not even their own. I mean, they got into a trade, and it's like if Fields had turned into that guy, the things you could do with the first pick overall, trading it back, getting a plethora of picks, it'd all be there, but you just can't. Like, if Fields isn't the guy, you're going to have to move on. You have to re-dip, and you have to try to make it work with a quarterback that can become your franchise guy. Because when I watch Bills Chiefs every year, I watch that game and go, we don't play in the same league as these two teams. Like,
we don't play the same sport.
It's insane watching Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes battle, because I'm just like, how could we ever think that we could win anything when these guys are playing? And the funny thing is, the last time we had an unbelievable instant classic that was Chiefs Bills, it was that 13 seconds left game. Chiefs went down and tied it and won an OT. Neither team even went to the Super Bowl. The Bengals won the next week, and Patrick Mahomes didn't even go to the Super Bowl. So, like, the peak game of those playoffs was a divisional round game where neither team made it to the Super Bowl. And so it's just, you watch it and you just go, I don't think you can ever do it without the quarterback. Why are the Houston Texans relevant this year? Because they got CJ Stroud. Why did the Bengals, suddenly go to a Super Bowl and multiple AFC championship games? Because they got the quarterback. I mean, it just doesn't happen if you don't have it. And man, I will sign up every single year for Chiefs Bills right now. Like, just book it in there. Just like, these two teams have to make the playoffs because we have to have this game every year. Just book it in. I want it every single year because it is always the most fun game. It is so much fun to watch those two play.
And yeah, and then even they've met a couple of times in the regular season over the past couple of years, and they never feel the same.
No, not at all.
The same thing's not on the line. The same stakes aren't on the line.
Exactly.
And but just to go back to that quarterback thing, I think what every fan should realize that rookie extensions are first allowed after a player's third year, correct?
Right. Yep.
If your thought isn't, let me sign that quarterback the second he's available for an extension to guarantee I'm getting the cheapest rate,
move on.
Unless you're having that conversation as a fan base, you don't have the guy.
Right.
Move on, try again, find the guy. We'll talk about it this offseason when we do a little fixing your franchise type stuff, but Trevor Lawrence is going to be the next conversation.
Yep. Absolutely.
Tua Tagovailoa is going to be the next conversation.
Exactly. Yep.
And not at any point did we say Tua needs to be signed to an extension immediately because we want to get a good deal.
Right.
Guess what? Tua is not the guy.
Exactly.
Can you build a team around an okay quarterback? Yes.
Sure.
Can you put in a great defense like Cleveland had this year? Yes. Can you have
Absolutely.
a million weapons and have a great running game like the Tennessee Titans? Yes.
Yep.
Are you going to win a championship doing that? Not likely.
No, not likely. I mean, and the argument that'll come back right now is, well, look at the NFC Championship game. You have Jared Goff against Brock Purdy. Well, Brock Purdy was playing at an MVP level during this year. I don't care if he was Mr. Irrelevant or not. First of all, you get very lucky to have Mr. Irrelevant become what Brock Purdy has become, and you're in a perfect system for him to succeed. But
The number of people that failed in the scouting
yeah,
draft front
yeah,
office community in order for Brock to be successful is astronomical.
exactly,
If
absolutely.
people were fired specifically off passing on a prospect like Brock, the entire league would be out of jobs. Every
Absolutely.
scout, every director of player personnel development, everybody would be out of a job. It
Absolutely.
doesn't happen.
And this revisionist history of like people thinking that Jared Goff wasn't a good quarterback is like I'm kind of done with it. Like this guy's got several over 4,400 yard passing seasons. I don't care if he was with McVay's offense. He is a very good quarterback. When people are like, "Oh, well they traded him away because they needed to get the elite quarterback." Do you know what they did after his third year? They signed him to an extension. Like this is a guy that they said that they were going to keep around after his third year. He played in a Super Bowl on his rookie contract. He is a very good quarterback, first pick overall the year that he was taken, and now he's leading another team into a very good into the NFC Championship game. He is in a great situation in Detroit. That's exactly the type of offense and scheme that he needs to be successful. And people are like, "Oh, well, if you put pressure on him, he'll throw a pick." Okay, name a quarterback where that's not true. Like that oh, wow, pressure can make a quarterback throw an interception. Wow, interesting. But like Jared Goff has been a very, very good quarterback for a long time. And so when you're saying like, if you don't know after the third year, well, the Rams knew after the third year. They just had the opportunity to go get a guy like Matt Stafford, who's a Hall of Fame level quarterback, when they were in a championship window, and they made an aggressive move and it worked out for them. They won a Super Bowl. So don't go back and thinking like, oh, Jared Goff isn't, that good of a quarterback, or Brock Purdy's Mr. Irrelevant. The two quarterbacks that are in the NFC Championship game are also very talented. They might not be
Yeah.
Mahomes or Allen, but they're very good.
Yeah. And it is funny because you got, Mahomes wasn't a first overall pick. Lamar was the last pick in the first round. So
Right.
you kind of have like a full spectrum
Mm-hmm.
of, where to find quarterbacks. But it also just goes to show that you don't have to be picking at number one
Sure.
to find the guy.
Right.
You just have to, I don't know, scout correctly,
Sure.
analyze the guy right. Like, hey, a little bit of luck. Because let's not forget, when Baltimore drafted Lamar, like the
Mm-hmm.
talks were like, all right, so what position is he playing?
Yeah, exactly.
Is he converting to a wide receiver? Is he playing running back? Let's see what Baltimore does with them. And I hate to say it, I didn't have any eyes or ears in the room. Who's not to say this guy, Ozzy, had that plan all along. And then he saw a thing or
Right.
two in training camp, was like, okay, I was wrong. He'll play quarterback.
Right. Right.
We
Right.
have
Absolutely.
no idea if that was the intention of the Baltimore Ravens the entire time, was to
Absolutely.
have him play quarterback even.
Right. Well, they knew it was going to take time for him to develop. But like, what's funny is all the quarterbacks that played last weekend, Brock Purdy was the only one that was not a first round pick. Right. He was the only one that was not a first round pick. But almost all of them, except for I think C.J. Stroud, were guys that took time to develop and to be solid quarterbacks in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes didn't play basically his entire rookie year. Josh Allen took 3 years basically to get to where he was, a successful NFL quarterback. Lamar Jackson took time to become a successful NFL quarterback, kind of transitioning from college into the pros. Jared Goff was not very good his rookie season and then developed and became a good quarterback. Jordan Love sat behind Aaron Rodgers for years before. Like, there is this way of becoming a great quarterback that is not necessarily like you just come in off, from college and are an unbelievable player. It takes time to develop, and having a good system, a good franchise to build you up, and then getting the best out of your talent is something that has to happen. So it's just kind of like one of those things of like, if you think, Bryce Love had a really tough first year, right? And Bryce Young, sorry, Bryce Love was
Okay.
an old
Doesn't
Stanford
play
running
anymore.
back. Yeah, exactly. Bryce Young had a very tough rookie year. He had terrible coaching all around him. He struggled. I'm not writing him off completely at this point because there was talent enough to see that he should have been the first pick overall, and it can take time to develop. We will see what that story turns into, but the quarterbacks that are successful, they usually have a good coaching staff around them, a good organization around them, and they take a little time to become unbelievable Super Bowl winning quarterbacks.
Yeah. So, speaking of the right coaching staff, there has actually been a number of hires
Yep.
in the NFL already. And we're just going to spend a couple minutes here at the end of the show just going over who's been hired, what we think, who's still out there. Um, let's start with, I think, the very first hire that actually went down was Gerard Mayo with the New England Patriots. And
Yep.
the reason it happened so fast was, I don't know if you heard this, Tim, but it was actually built into Mayo's latest contract extension
Yeah.
that he was taking over for Bill Belichick once Belichick was moving on.
Yeah.
So if you notice, the Patriots, they didn't go through any round of interviews.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to comply with the Rooney Rule, which, surprise, surprise, is making controversial headlines again, like it does
Sure.
every year, because
Yep.
it's one of the weirdest rules in any league.
Yep.
And Mayo just went straight ahead and took the head coaching seat because it was already in his contract, and
Right. Right.
Belichick had been grooming him for another year. So what can we expect out of Mayo? Now,
I,
I don't think he's in charge of player personnel. That
right.
was my first question. Is
Sure.
he doing the Bill Belichick thing?
Yeah.
And based on what I'm seeing, they are actually going and hiring a general manager, unless you've seen anything differently.
I believe they're supposed to be hiring a general manager. Yes.
Yeah, so that is going to be a major shakeup in the Patriots organization, because you've had Belichick in charge of the player personnel decisions for what, 20 plus years now.
Yeah.
And so now you're bringing a new, young, defensive minded head coach
Mm-hmm.
who is going to be handed a roster and say, hey, this is what you have to work with.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, obviously, head coaches have input in roster decisions when it comes to free agent signings, when it comes to the draft, but it's not their primary purpose, their primary job, which maybe that's why the roster has been suffering the past couple of years.
Right.
Maybe Bill didn't have the time to put in the office to, you know, grind out, mid-major tape, unless it's Chattanooga, where he's, drafting guards out of in the
Right.
first round.
Right.
But so I think it's going to breathe fresh air into the
Yes.
Patriots organization,
Yes.
while at the same time, like, staying true to the New England roots, which,
Right.
let's look back on it, are successful roots.
Oh yeah.
That building, that staff at its core is a successful organization.
Absolutely.
And I think with fresh minds and fresh faces, they will be able to get back there one day.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a I guess interesting hire, only in that, there was no interview process or anything of this was built through inside the organization. There've been a lot of Patriots coaches that have left and become head coaches that were not successful. Mike Vrabel was not a coach with them, but became very successful in his own right as a coach. So people have come out of the Patriots organization and been successful, but there have been a lot of cases of them not being successful. Romeo
Mm.
Crennel comes to mind.
Josh
Bill O'Brien,
McDaniels, Patricia.
yeah, Bill O'Brien had some success as a Texans coach, but never got to the big one. Made one of the worst trades I've ever seen as a GM. Also, Bill O'Brien, fun fact, coached 8 seasons underneath Bill Belichick and Nick Saban and never won a championship. So that's got to be like the only person in the world. Unbelievable. But the thing is, the Patriots do need to have that bit of fresh air. They need to split that back up and have GM and coach be separated, and they need to start bringing in talent from a different perspective. Belichick, probably the greatest coach that's ever coached, built teams the exact way he needed them to be for him to have successful rosters, but it's just got a little past him at this point. Like they haven't been able to bring in talent that has actually succeeded in any real form. If there was a team right now on the current roster that I was like, they're going to be in the pits again next year, it's the Patriots. I know they have the third pick overall, but like they have to absolutely hit on a quarterback like the Texans did with CJ Stroud for them to be anywhere close to relevant next year. That roster is barren and awful. So it's going to be a slow rebuild, but I think bringing in Mayo and knowing that this was the plan, they're going to allow that plan to play out. It's not going to be like we're giving him 2 years and then he can, hit the curb. It's going to be a slow rebuild process that they're planning on having happen, which is what smart organizations do. So it's not really totally surprising that the Patriots are doing it.
And if you want to talk about the opposite of a smart organization, 2 years and kick the curb, that's the Josh McDaniels story in Las
Absolutely.
Vegas. Um,
Absolutely.
they had Antonio Pierce, former Giants linebacker, fill in
Hmm.
as interim head coach, and he led them to a 5-4 record, which
Yep.
included wins over the Chargers and the Chiefs. And
Blowout over the Chargers.
yeah, and like kind of rallied that team around him,
Hmm.
with his, player. Like one of the things like you think of like D'Amico is one of the great, not great. He can be great, but he's a very good young head coach right now. And one of the
Right.
things that was great was he played the game recently, and
Hmm.
he's a player's player,
Yeah.
much a la a Dan Campbell, much a la a Mike Vrabel. So
Yep.
Antonio
Yeah.
Pierce is kind of like filling that same mold, like,
Right.
hey guys, I was there very recently. I know what it's like. This is what we have to do.
Yeah.
Now, I think the big question with the Raiders is how do they surround Antonio Pierce with I think he needs some veteran minds around him.
Yeah.
I think he needs some coordinators that have been in the league and, hey, listen, Antonio, we got the X's, we got the O's. You do kind of like the CEO role. You are like the overseer. You're the rah 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 guy.
Right.
We will teach you as we go along about this stuff. But I think his support staff is going to be huge. And they actually did hire a new general manager today,
Yep.
Tom Telesco, the former Chargers general manager,
Right.
which
Who was fired after that Raiders
yeah,
game this
yeah,
year?
yeah. I did. So my first thought when I saw that was, ooh, I don't know about this.
Sure.
Because the Chargers roster over the past few years, it was a lot of free agency and draft moves that looked good on paper at the time, but
Right.
wound up not paying off. But
Right.
you got to say, like, how much of that was Brandon Staley?
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
bring in J.C. Jackson, coming off of one of the best cornerback seasons ever out of New England, pay him a
Yep.
buttload of money, and then he can't fit in the defense because they're
Right.
playing a completely different scheme.
Absolutely. Yep.
Was that Telesco's fault for bringing in, Jackson without realizing that he had no fit? Was
Right.
Brandon Staley requesting that Telesco bring him in?
Sure.
We don't know these things,
Right. Of
but
course.
all we know is the move did not work out.
Right.
The Khalil Mack move, it didn't really work out. Although Khalil Mack had a great year this
It's a
year,
very good year. Yeah. Absolutely.
but overall the move didn't work out. We got the Quentin Johnston draft pick this year, which
That was
is
a rough one.
looking like N'Keal Harry, Jalen Rager
Right.
type of pick. So the Telesco hiring does worry me for Las Vegas
Sure.
because, like New England, this is a roster that's lacking a lot of pieces.
Yep.
You got a great wide receiver in Devontae Adams, but he is definitely on the wrong side of 29.
Right.
I'm not saying he's done. I'm not saying he's lost a
Oh,
step,
by no
but
means.
for where this roster is, he's not the right fit.
Absolutely.
You have Max Crosby, who's becoming a top 6 edge defender in the league,
Yeah.
but minus him, there's not much else in that defense.
Right.
So it's a very bare bones roster that's going to need, a little TLC.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure if Telesco is the right guy to bring that
Yeah.
TLC in.
I agree with you. When I saw the hiring, I kind of went, I don't know. I mean, when you look at it kind of on paper, some of the guys he brought in were interesting moves, even the draft picks. Like on paper, Quentin Johnston was an interesting draft pick to bring in to pair in with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And, with those three and Austin Eckler and Justin Herbert, you'd think like, yeah, this is going to be a pretty solid offense. It has never panned out in Los Angeles for the Chargers. Now, that's like Chargers history, right? Like
Yeah.
things just don't pan out for the Chargers ever. So maybe, he goes into Las Vegas, he can bring in a couple of pieces, start reshaping that team a little bit, but there is a lot of work there to do. As far as Antonio Pierce, Max Crosby was one of the biggest supporters of him and said, basically, I want to be traded if he's not brought in as the head coach. Like if you don't make him the full-time head coach. The players backing him and pushing for him. I just thought it was kind of refreshing to see a guy who became the interim head coach during the year that had success getting another year to try to see if it'll work out, because more often than not, you'll get a guy who becomes interim head coach, maybe, takes a team that was below 500 and has a above 500 finish. And then they're like, all right, we're going to go on to the next, big name out there
That
in
that that
coaching.
actually happened last time the Raiders were in this
Absolutely.
situation with, was it, Rick Bisaccia?
Rich Bisaccia, who's
Yeah,
now in Green Bay as their special teams coordinator.
yeah.
Yep. I mean, it it happens all the time, and so it's nice to see maybe this is going to be a different way of going about it. You have players backing him. You had more success on the field. Let's see what you can get with an entire offseason as him as head coach. Get some coordinators in there, some different players in there, and see what you can do. So I am interested in the head coaching hire, at least out of it.
Yeah, and then the final head coaching hire, I believe officially as of today, is Brian Callahan,
Hmm.
the Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator who was named head coach of the Tennessee Titans. And I have two thoughts about this hire. One is I like because we just talked earlier about McVay and Shanahan and
Yeah,
like having an offensive play calling head coach is great for your quarterback because it
sure.
guarantees a consistency in the playbook. So I like it from that point of view because you
Yeah,
have what I'm assuming is Will Levis is taking over that team next year.
yeah.
Ryan Tannehill's moving on free agency. Um, Malik Willis, God bless. Um, but I feel like it's the Will Levis show next year. So now
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
pairing a young quarterback with a young offensive minded head coach,
Hmm.
and they're kind of like locked in, like we are going to flounder or flourish together.
Sure.
What I don't like about the hire is that it was Brian Callahan, and I don't know how much of that Zach Taylor magic
Right.
he grabbed because Zach Taylor was the play caller in Cincinnati, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I also don't know how much of that was Burrow, Chase, Higgins. So I'm not saying that he's going to fail. It's
Right.
more like I haven't seen enough of a sample size of him not having all those pieces in place to be confident that he would succeed.
Yeah, I mean, as an outsider to it, it was kind of a meh hire to me. But everything I've read, they're saying that Callahan was going to have a lot of different options, and he had a lot of suitors this offseason. I don't know if that's just like the Titans trying to say that because they didn't let him out the door and they made sure he was their head coach, when they hired him yesterday. But I don't know. It's exactly like you're saying. I don't know how much of it is having great weapons and Zach Taylor, kind of molding that offense together, and how much of it was Callahan there as well. I mean, we've seen, Mike McDaniel from San Francisco, even though he's not the main guy calling the shots like Shanahan is, move on and be a successful head coach in Miami. But I don't know. It was just a hire that I kind of went, yeah, okay, we'll see what happens. Maybe it pans out really nicely for them, but it also felt like one of those hires that like 3 years down the road, we're kind of going like, okay, well, they're on to their next one or whatever.
It also felt weird with, um, like obviously the timing is weird because Brian Johnson cannot currently accept a head coaching job because he's
Right.
still actively pursuing a Super Bowl title.
Ben Johnson.
And
Yeah.
then I'm sorry, Ben Johnson.
Yep.
Brian Johnson will not be pursuing a Super Bowl title either this year. He will also be pursuing new employment.
Right.
Um, But Bobby, Bobby with the Texans losing on Saturday,
Yeah.
Bobby's now allowed to sign off for a head
Right.
coaching
Slowick
job.
would have been, yeah,
Yeah,
maybe a more interesting name to me, but
yes, but like Slowick and Johnson, like neither of them are like currently hired.
yeah,
So I would understand like I don't want to sit here and say like I'm trashing Callahan saying like
sure.
he's like the third of that, lineage of coaches,
Of
that third of
course.
that
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
But like it kind of looks like he is the third of that group,
Right.
because in Detroit you had Dan Campbell, very defensive minded guy. Like it was obviously Ben Johnson's offense. Houston, same thing. You have D'Amico Ryans, very defensive minded head coaches. Obviously, Bobby Sloak's offense with a rookie quarterback, implemented amazingly. But then you have Brian Callahan, who is with Zach Taylor, who is an offensive minded head coach. So, it's how much of that rubbed off, are
Right.
the Titans selling themselves early to secure a
Sure.
guy?
Right.
I feel like they would have been best. But the other thing is like we don't know what these conversations are like.
Of course.
Bobby Slowick is obviously in the division, so
Yep.
he could have been like, salty, like, I'm not going in the division. I don't
Sure.
want to. I worked with CJ all year, and guess what? I don't want to face CJ.
Yeah.
He could
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
be like, he's the boogeyman. I don't want to be
Right.
going against the boogeyman. I worked with him all year. And, Ben Johnson, for all we know, he could have walked into that building and, the new owner could have maybe rubbed him the wrong way, especially
Sure.
with the way Mike Vrabel was handled this year.
Right.
Maybe he saw the way Vrabel was handled and was like, the way they let him go, I'm not cool with that. So I'm not sure if this
Yeah.
is too, because at the end of the day, this is their job. This is their
Right.
boss and this is their
Right.
employer. So think of like every interview you've gone on in your own personal career
Right.
and been like, this isn't a match. It's a great job. It's a great offer, but I'm not feeling a match here. So we don't know how much of them going with Callahan was maybe them getting no's already, from
Right.
other people.
Absolutely. And that could totally be the case because this isn't an awesome roster either. I mean, this is rough. I think we both respect Mike Vrabel and think he's a very good head coach and totally expect him to be successful wherever he goes next. He could only get this team to 6-11 this year. And yes, Will Levis is a young quarterback that you're going to be coming in and coaching, but he was a second round pick for a reason. And not a lot of guys outside of the first round become very successful quarterbacks. And so I don't know, man. It's not one of the top names that was out there to me. It was a quick hire that felt like they may have been having trouble getting people that seemed like they were going to be interested. And it's not a great roster that he's going to be going into. So it seems like a tough one for him to be able to go in there and turn that thing around after a guy like Vrabel was leaving there and not having success as a coach there. So kind of a meh hire to me.
And you also got to remember, for a lot of these guys, if you just look at head coaches throughout the past 30 years, how many guys are one and done? They get one opportunity to
Right.
become a head coach in the NFL, and that's it. So they could be sitting there looking at that Titans offensive line being like, do I want this to be my one opportunity?
Sure.
Especially when you have, the LA job is still available, the Washington job still available, Atlanta, Seattle. I don't want to say Carolina because I don't think Carolina is much better than Tennessee, but that
Yeah.
job is also still available. So, at what point do these guys say, like, hey, this might be my only shot at this job,
Right.
this thing that I want to do for the rest of my life?
Right.
Let me make sure that I'm not, sabotaging myself with, a 3-year project where at the end of it, they're going to say, like, hey, thanks for the tank job. Thanks for the 3 years. We're bringing in a new guy to, take care of this roster that we actually built up. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting to talk about because there's the football side of it. There's the human side of it. And there's also the side of it that we have no idea about. The conversations and the topics that we just will never, never hear about because nobody's a fly in the room.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, before we get out of here, Dan, we got 2 championship games this weekend. We got Ravens Chiefs, we got Lions and 49ers. Who do you got for Super Bowl 58? Oh my gosh, 48, 58.
So I will say that my wife is very upset because the
I know the
NFL is
stories.
rigged. So according to my wife, it's going to be the Ravens versus the 49ers because of the color of the logo.
And the 49ers will win, right?
And the 49ers will win because
there's less color.
The Ravens will win because they're on the bottom. I think that's the way the conspiracy works.
The TikTok I saw was the team that has less color in the logo of the colors has won. So that's the script.
Okay, so my wife is going according to the script.
Okay.
Myself, however, I actually predicted a 49ers Chiefs Super Bowl. I want to say maybe halfway through the season.
Yeah.
Like at the time, the Chiefs were like 6-6, while the 49ers were, I think, still either undefeated or one loss. So
right.
I'm going to stick with that prediction. I think we're going to get the 49ers Chiefs rematch from, what was it, the 2019 Super Bowl, the last Jimmy Garoppolo Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be, Chiefs 49ers for the Super Bowl this year.
Gotcha. I shouldn't bet against Patrick Mahomes, and I will. I didn't last week, so at least I was right then. So I can take my one here. But I do think the Ravens defense is so much better than what that Bills defense was, and I just think that the Chiefs are that those offensive struggles we saw most of the year are gonna come back in this game with an actual decent defense playing against them. And the way the Bills, I mean, I know the Chiefs kind of figured it out later in the game, but the way the Bills were actually running the ball against the Chiefs early in that game, that's the Ravens could not be a scarier team to play if you're going to be able to just run the ball over a team. So I'm going to say Ravens, and I do think the Cinderella story ends and in San Francisco, and that the 49ers take down the Lions. Ultimately, I just think the Lions need a couple more guys defensively, especially in like the linebacker area. But if Deebo Samuel doesn't play, it's going to be a lot closer than that. The 49ers are completely different without Deebo. But if Deebo plays, I think the 49ers will take care of business. So I'll go Ravens and Niners in the Super Bowl.
All right. We will see what happens this weekend. Everybody who checked us out, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you could please, before you leave, drop a like on the video, hit subscribe. We're trying to grow this account. We're still fairly new to the game, so any feedback is much appreciated. You can always follow us on all of our socials at TikTok and Twitter at BFF_pod, on Instagram at BannersFlyForever. This is Tim and Dan. Tune in to the channel next week. We'll be back with our conference championship recaps. We'll have a Super Bowl preview and plenty of mock drafts to come. You guys enjoy the weekend, and you take it easy.
Have a good week, everyone.